Welcome to Adeptus On-Air, the show where we examine how individuals and companies make decisions that drive their business and personal success. Each week, we connect with notable professionals who pull back the curtain on the industries that Adeptus has been on the cutting edge of for the last 30 years, including music, sports, and entertainment, as well as new emerging markets. Welcome to the latest edition of Adeptus On Air, and today we have a very eclectic guest, I would say, in Henry Woodman. Henry is a tech entrepreneur, angel investor, business coach, producer, person of many hats that I'm sure we'll get into. So Henry, thanks for joining the show today.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And eclectic, yeah, I'll start to use that. That sounds kind of unique.
Very cool. So where do we start? Just tell us about just your general upbringing and how that led to you becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know if that led to it or was just kind of surrounded by it. Listen, in the United States, you kind of look at people and you go, okay, that's a normal thing to do, do things to make money as an entrepreneur. But, my I was born in 1960 and my parents were divorced when I was 5. And so ultimately I lived with my mom and saw my dad maybe once a week or maybe every other week. On weekends, we would see him. And it was more of my dad worked in the airline business. So whenever we had an opportunity, we would travel. Back in the day, you could get tickets for your kids, 60s and 70s, right? Um, and my dad had a small business and was also involved in larger enterprises. And I thought, oh, it's kind of normal, you do your things. And I would, I started, when I went to a swim meet in Mexico early on, I think I was 13. I bought a switchblade and brought it back to my junior high, trying to impress my friends and opening up this knife. And they thought it was the coolest thing ever. And of course, I go back to Mexico as a 13-year-old kid, buy a couple of boxes of switchblades and sell them in school. One, to make a little bit of money, and two, to be, the cool kid on the block, if you will, right? And then I started doing portraits of pets pet portraits in my garage. And, eventually I'm in college and I'm sitting in a laundromat with a pocket full of quarters and I don't want to study. And I'm addicted at the time to Pac-Man. And so I see there's no video games in this laundromat and think, well, there's got to be a laundromat in Tucson that has video games. None of them do. So I asked, do you want video games? We'll share the revenue. And they said, sure. So I took my tuition money, which I wouldn't recommend, but I did. And I bought a used video game for a couple $100, put it in a laundromat. And, 3 years later, by the time I graduated college, I had video games throughout Tucson's laundromats where I went to college. That was my first little venture of sort of hedonistically doing something that I wanted to do or solving a problem that I had, right? I want to play video games. I'm bored. I'm a captive audience. I have quarters. And hell, even if I don't have quarters, there's a dollar bill changer. I can get quarters and play these machines. The sad reality is I never really got to play the machines that I bought because every time I went in there, somebody was playing them and I didn't want to take away from my own profits. That was kind of the early childhood. I ended up relatively normal, middle America, born and raised in South Florida, went to college at the University of Arizona in Tucson.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So it sounds like you had the entrepreneurial spirit at an early age, and you were, at least raised on your father's side by someone who owned a business. So that was pretty normalized for you, that entrepreneurial side. Where I think in many households, maybe a majority of households, most people might be employees, and may not see that at an early age. Do you think that made a big difference in just how your outlook on the world and outlook on business?
Yeah, I'm going to have to say, yeah. I mean, if I would have imagined myself looking at my dad, punching a clock on 9 to 5 and working for a large corporation, I would have thought, okay, that's what you do, right? But seeing him running his own little business and, going off and doing his thing, I thought, that seems kind of cool, right? And it's not that I looked at life and I said, that's what I want to do. I kind of looked at life and said, you know what? what do I want to do? Right. And, there was a point where I was working on a travel film crew because I liked filming and I liked traveling. And so, it wasn't that it was my crew and it was my, eventually it was my company, but it didn't start out that way. So, at the end of the day, I think it was, what is it that I enjoy to do? What makes me happy? And when you're young, you don't really care that much about the money. I mean, obviously you do, but you don't have a mortgage and a family and kids and payments that, will sort of drown you if you don't make them. So you have less to lose, if you will.
Yep, yep, it makes total sense. What would you say are some of the pros for those who haven't made that jump? What would you say are some of the pros and cons of entrepreneurship?
Well, the challenge is really, if you look at it from a purely rational perspective and you say, listen, 90% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years. That's scary as hell, right? And then arrogantly you think, well, I'm special, I'm different. I'm not one of those 90%. I'm one of the 10%, right? So I think the illusion is, oh my God, I'll do what I want. I don't have to work. I mean, I can make my own hours. I can do whatever. I'll have more freedom. And the reality is it's kind of bullshit. You're the first one in, you're the last one out. If there's no money, you're the last to get paid, if at all, right? And, I'd mortgaged my house. I had cut my payments. I literally was on the edge multiple times thinking, you know what, I'd just be happier and I'd have less stress if I went to a big company, got a paycheck, got all the benefits, and didn't have to deal with all this BS. Running a business is not easy, setting up the structure, understanding things. I mean, when I first started my last tech company, I don't know tech, I don't write code. And people would say to me, oh, you need to hire the best people. Like, I don't even know what that means. I can't even afford myself, right? You need to have a vision. I'm like, yeah, I got a vision not to die, right? I'm afraid of losing it all. Or you need to have KPIs. And I'm like, I don't even know what a KPI is, right? I didn't have a clue. And ultimately I went back to school, to university, to get an MBA in entrepreneurship because I thought, I don't know what I don't know. And if I really want to make a go at this, I need to learn how this works, right? What are the structural things that I need to do? What exactly is a KPI? What is a vision? What is a mission? What is a culture? Who are the people? How do I hire the people? How do I maintain them? How do I motivate them, lead them? You know, those are the things that you learn by making mistakes and trying to benefit from what you've learned.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. You mentioned tech and being involved in tech. I know probably the hottest topic in tech right now is artificial intelligence. AI. Take it wherever you want, but I was going to ask, what are your general thoughts on that? I don't know if you want general thoughts in a business sense, in a societal sense, in a potential replacement of workers sense. There's so many different layers to it. Just what
Well,
your
yeah. Listen, when I started tech, it's true. You needed to hire expensive people to write code or, go overseas and find coders that were capable and have somebody, manage them, right? Now, first of all, I love the possibilities and the opportunities that AI brings, right? I mean, even now, I'm going full circle and following a dream that I had 40 years ago to produce a TV series. And I'm really close to thinking, you know what, you can do text to video with AI that's really good and a fraction of the time and cost if you went, old school, if you will. But as far as it goes with disruption of jobs, I think that remains to be seen only because, like everything else, from the cotton mill to the printing press, everybody goes, oh, my, that's going to just kill this industry. People are going to be in uproar. There's always other things to do. I mean, at the end of the day, if you learn how to prompt for AI and you learn how to develop things that are AI, I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity now because of AI. It's easier and it's faster to do things you couldn't do before. So, if I were a young entrepreneur, I would just go out and look and see what's out there. First of all, are you solving a problem, or do you see a problem, solve it, right? Secondly, say in the early days, say yes to everything until you find the thing you can win at or build a moat around. And then you have to say no to everything except the one thing that you can find that you win at. Because, when you're young and hungry, you're a hoard of nickels, right? You're like, I'll take anything because I got to survive, right? Eventually you find this is what clients want. This is the problem I can solve. This is what I can do better than competitors, or it doesn't exist to this extent. I'm going to focus maniacally on that. I'm going to say no to all those other things that are distractions.
Yep, yep, that's awesome. And angel investing, I saw that you're involved in that. Can you one define the term for the listeners out there? Just angel investing, and two, just how'd you get involved into it?
Yeah, I was dumb and vain, and I don't think I would continue to do it. But angel investing really is it's people with a little bit of money that want to, if you will, bet on a company that needs some capital to grow. And it's generally not, it's before a venture capitalist or a private equity goes in. So if I see an idea and somebody goes, listen, we're looking for a little bit of money to get us to the next level. I like the idea, or I like the people, or in many cases, there are funds that have limited partners, and then you say, it's a cool idea. I want to invest in that. Just a couple of bucks. I don't want to be intimately involved. The challenge for me, really, not that I don't like the angel investing, is that it becomes a logistical pain in the butt every April when I have to get all these K1s for taxes, right? It's like people can't get K1s in time. They have deferred stuff. They have things that don't come out till July. And I'm like, how do I live like this? I mean, I got to file April 15th, but you guys want to just extend things. And then what do the investors do? And it just annoys me. And I'm thinking I could have been happier and less stressed with putting it all into an ETF or something. That's my personal view.
No, that makes sense because we, are in the tax business, obviously, and K1s have been a problem for years as far as getting them in on time. And a lot of clients have to file extensions only because of the K1s, simply because the K1s haven't come in on time.
That's exactly right. And I do that every year. And I think to myself, listen, everything is automated. I mean, come the end of the year, you should have a computer that says, hey, we know exactly what we got, what we didn't get, what we spent, and here's what's left over as our profit. Here's what you get or don't. And then they get all this creative accounting, right? And if my accountant says, well, did you get any profit? Did they share it? And I'm like, no, I didn't get anything from that company. And they go, well, we did a deferment. And then I'm like, oh, that just fucked up my taxes. Or, and I'm like, oh, for God's sakes, I have to refile or send an amendment in. And I'm like, why do I need this aggravation?
No, completely understand. What went into the decision to invest in XYZ companies? I know you mentioned the people or the idea or things like that, but a lot of them are early stage. So, there comes a discernment to kind of figure out, okay, which early stage has the better chance of lasting. Some do, some don't.
Right.
How come up with that decision?
I gotta be honest, you really never know. I mean, I put some money into a company that is a direct consumer clothing brand, which to me, I would never in my wildest dreams consider because I like B2B SaaS enterprise. And I knew the team and I thought, okay, I know the person who's on the board as well. So I know all these people and I have faith in them. And you know what? If it works, that's great. So far, it's done fairly well. Most of the time, I will look at an idea and I'm like, I like that idea. I think it solves a problem. Okay, good. I'll put a couple of bucks in. Or conceptually, like I put some money into a fund that only focuses on B2B, enterprise, SaaS, profitable, and not in Silicon Valley. All right. So the people in Silicon Valley have a little bit skewed reality about what their valuation might be. If you're not in Silicon Valley, you're more realistic. I like SaaS models because it's repeating revenue. I like enterprise because it's less clients and dealing with consumers. I like the profitability part. And what he's done is pretty ingenious because since valuations have come down to reality in recent years, and people are going for round A, round B, round C, they need to be profitable first. And they need to say, well, I need to expand to other markets and I need capital to do so, right? So he'll give them, for lack of a better term, a bridge loan from that A to the next round, let's say B, and we then get out at the next round. So that if it's a 2 or a 3 times increase in a year or two, great, we'll do it. And we don't have to wait for a big event like an acquisition or a merger where we can get out. And I think that's a challenge for early angel investors is the dilution part. You buy a couple of shares and you got a little piece of the company, and next thing you know, they've raised and raised and raised, and now you own a fraction of that company. You're diluted, and then they all go bankrupt because they don't know. This is the biggest challenge for me. When I started my company, I didn't know how to raise money, so I didn't. And I tell people, had I known, I probably would have. I would have spent it like a drunken sailor. I would have bankrupted the company because I would not have learned from the stupid things that I did. Right. And I think bootstrapping and learning from your mistakes and overcoming those hurdles and mountains is helpful in the long run. Now, every business can't bootstrap because there are some that are very cash intensive early on and need capital early. Others, software now, and even with AI, you can create pretty good programs, SaaS programs for little money. And then once the hard part is not the creation of the software, it's the marketing. How do you get clients to sign up and integrate? They don't take you seriously for the first year or two.
Yeah, that makes total sense. The Reincarnation of Marie is a interesting story. You kind of alluded to that earlier. Your father wrote this, correct? Just give us the backstory.
Yeah, so my dad was an entrepreneur, but he was also a travel writer. He liked writing, and over 40 years ago, I'm living in LA at the time, and he's moving. My sister's helping him move. There's a manuscript sitting on a file cabinet while she's moving the garage, and she asks him, and he goes, "Oh, it's a tribute to a friend." And she asks what it's about, and she says, "That's pretty cool. Can I read it?" She reads it. She loves it. She calls me up in LA and she says, "Daddy wrote this love story." And I'm like, "Dad, love story? Come on, like that does not compute, right? He's a lecherous pig." And then I read it and I was like, "Oh my God, that's amazing." I called Dad and I said, "Dad, what are you doing with this?" He goes, "Nothing. It was really kind of a period tribute thing." And I said, "Can I buy the rights?" He says, "Sure." So I bought the rights, and then I'm thinking to myself, that's kind of nepotistic of me. I had a friend that was producing a movie and I asked him to read it, and he says, "Henry, I'm in the middle of something." I said, "Just, when you got time." 3 days later, he calls me up. He goes, "This is amazing. I love this. We're meant to do this. Let's do this together." This is more than 40 years ago, right? So he ends up getting into real estate because he didn't like the movie distribution deal he got. I end up going to Chile producing game shows, opportunity. And then ultimately, I start the tech company. And now here, 40 years later, I say, okay, now let's follow up on that passion. So I published the book a couple of months ago. It's called The Reincarnation of Marie, like you said. And we're developing a TV series called Slippin, which is a far deeper dive into the concept of reincarnation or slipping through time or slipping into the metaverse or slipping into your own mindset and believing that you met a reincarnated person. So it's based on an actual woman named Marie Barsterseff who did exist in history. She wrote a journal in the late 1800s between her 14th and 24th year. She died at 24 when she had tuberculosis. 2 years after her death, her mom publishes her journal and it becomes an international bestseller. 70 years later, a guy picks up the book, reads her journal, falls in love with her, and believes she wrote it for him because she talks about reincarnation and things like that. And he ends up thinking, "Oh my God, I've lost my mind. I've fallen in love with a dead woman." Right. And so next thing you know, he believes he's found her reincarnation. He tells this story to my dad. He says, "Listen, before I go off to war, you have to know this because I feel like, I haven't told anybody and I was too embarrassed, but I met this woman I fell in love with her through her journal, and now we met her reincarnation." And that's kind of the story. The series is a far deeper dive into all of the lives that are in her era and how those lives are reincarnated or intertwined with the current protagonist era. So it's very trippy.
Wow, that's awesome. That sounds awesome and
Yeah.
amazing. And I like how there's actual like true roots to the story that you can kind of dig into. What's the ETA on production, and I know it's a work in progress, but what what's the ETA, you think?
Well, James, if I had that, I'd be a friggin' oracle. Production has gone down fairly dramatically over the last year or two because, they were on a arms race years ago, the streamers, that is, Amazon and Apple and Netflix and stuff. And Hollywood's having a slump. And I concern myself because we're looking at talking to and attracting showrunners who have done similar shows in that type of genre, historical fiction, paranormal romance type stuff. But what happens is, let's just play out the scenario. If we were to get somebody that was interested in spring of next year, by the time they get the cast and the director and the budget and everything together, we're talking, let's say, another 4 months. Okay, so summer of next year. Then you go to a streamer. Okay, so now you go into production in 2026, right? And you might see a release late 2026, 2027. Okay, now you think, and you talked about AI earlier, AI is getting so good so quickly that sometime in 2025 or 2026, I might be able to say, listen, let's convert this for a fraction of the cost to an AI thing. I mean, I know all the streamers and studios right now are anti-AI because the unions are like, no way, you're going to disrupt and we don't want that. And, we'll blackball and, whatever, blacklist you. I think
Mm.
that's going to change at some point because it's too appealing to produce something for a niche audience at a fraction of the cost and much faster. I mean, a regular movie, if you will, you spend 12-hour days paying for cast, crew, and location and all the production costs for 2 minutes of finished product. All right. So you're out there doing months of this and then the pre-production, and you say, listen, I can do all of this via AI in a matter of a week or two. What? I mean, that's where it's going. That's why I'm thinking if we don't get good traction by next summer, I would strongly consider going that AI text to video route.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like a smart way to go, especially if the technology is moving fast enough where you definitely pull that off. Um,
Yeah.
you also made travel productions, as you mentioned, American Airlines, American Express, was nominated for an Emmy. Just to talk about your experience there.
Yeah. So, when I was in college, I thought I wanted to produce and direct movies. I moved to Los Angeles. Of course, that didn't happen, and I ended up finding my way onto a travel film crew as what's called a PA, a production assistant. And eventually I would work my way into the sound guy, and after a couple of years, I'm producing travel films, and it was somewhat of a fantasy because hey, you don't have to work in a desk job, you have a different location, you're traveling around, you're getting treated well because they let you into places because you're filming, right? And so wow, that's great. You have fun, you're young, you don't have to worry about the health crappy food and weird food. I loved it. uh, the Emmy nominations really weren't for the travel films. When I was between gigs, I was working at a television station in LA and a television station in Miami. And the local area Emmys, I was given a nomination. So a bridesmaid, never a bride. But eventually, because I was doing travel films, I ended up doing game shows in Chile because Chile went from Pinochet's dictatorship to a democracy. And I thought, wow, opportunity. They have a new television network and new television stations, and they need content. So I fly down, hook up with the production group that I was using to do the support services when we were filming for Eastern Airlines, and end up saying, listen, introduce me, set up a meeting with these guys. And I come in like an American producer and I pitch an idea from a show I ripped off in the US for a younger demographic because Chile was a lot of young people. And within a couple of months, we're on the air. So again, I just look at it as like connect the dots. And, from there, I'm in Chile. The guy gives me a CD-ROM and he shows me a virtual reality 360 tour. And I'm like, oh my God, I can sit in a computer and look up, down, and all around of a destination. Get out of Dodge, coming from the travel film business. I want to do this. So, of course, I start another company called World Travel Vision to travel around with a camera and shoot 360 tours. Look at that, right? Eventually, those guys say, how do we put this stuff on this new World Wide Web thingy? We're talking now the mid to late 90s. And I'm like, I don't know, send them a CD-ROM, right? I had no idea. Thus, we slowly evolved to a tech company because how do I distribute virtual tours to the travel sites? And then when I learn about what's going on with the travel sites, I find that they don't even have pictures because the old reservation systems that still exist today were only sending rate and availability. No pictures were ever involved in the brick and mortar stores, at the travel agencies. So now if you go to any travel website on the planet and you see pictures of Hyatts and Hiltons and Wyndhams and stuff, they would come from my old company's servers. So that's where we kind of morphed into production to, now production of 360 tours, production, distribution. There's a problem with photos. That's the need to have. So let's focus on sizing, tagging, categorizing, and delivering photos everywhere. That's kind of how it all ended up.
Wow, that's amazing. And that's a credit to you for staying open-minded and fluid to just, wherever the openings, the needs are, you're willing to fill. And that's a good learning lesson for everybody involved. Of all the places you've traveled to, what would you say are your top 2 or 3 places and why?
I would probably say from a beauty and people, and I like the South Island of New Zealand. It's just a wonderful place. I once considered moving to New Zealand, but it's so far away, right? But there's great nature and there's not a lot of people and there's not a lot of mayhem and political unrest like, many other places. But um, I like New Zealand. I like Iguazu Falls in Brazil and Paraguay border and Argentina. There's a beautiful waterfall there. I also like Chile. Chile's a great country because it's got 3,000 miles of coastline. It's got an arid desert in the north. It's got Lake District in the south. It's got Patagonia. So, I lived there for a while, so I know Chile fairly well. I love Chile. And there's so many places. I could probably go back and say I liked Iceland because it's got some unique, cool features. So yeah, I just like to travel.
It's awesome. You've accomplished so much, just so much in your career, Henry. But what do you see is next on your docket in, say, the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, hopefully the series Slippin. First of all, we get a little acknowledgement for the reincarnation of Marie, but the goal 40 years ago was to turn that into a film. Now it's going to be a series, and if the series does well, then that will be on air. That's my goal. And I would certainly recommend that's not something anybody with a mind to say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to get into the film industry and make a lot of money." No, you're not. That's the 1%. It's like acting or music. It's like, yeah, it's a passion. It's something, but not a lot of people make a lot of money there, right? If you could afford to do it as a passion, great. And that's why I'm thinking, okay, now I can do that, right? Have fun with it. That's going to happen whether it's the traditional method or whether it's AI. It's something that will happen in the next 3 to 5 years.
It's awesome. And Henry, share your social channels where people can find you, where people can find the book,
Sure.
where they.
That'd be great. Thanks. I think the best place is I have a website called mariethestory.com. And it has the book, has information on the book and where to buy it. It has information on the author, my father. It has information on Slippin. And then it also has links to my LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. So you only need to go to one place and you can know everything. Well, not everything about me, but everything about Marie and Marie the Story.
Awesome, Henry. Thank you so much for joining Adeptus On-Air. And as I mentioned, very eclectic guests, and you didn't disappoint. So I really appreciate you sharing all your talents, your journey, your experience. It was fun.
Thanks, James, and good luck, man.
Thanks for listening to Adeptus On Air. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. The views and opinions by the podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Adeptus. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice.